Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive with us. Today we're looking at vitamin D and omega-3, and specifically for children with ASD. And we're going to zero in on irritability and hyperactivity. A lot of you have been asking about this.
Mm.
And you sent over this research article. It's a pretty dense one. 22 pages from the Journal of Steroid Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. Luckily, I have our expert here to help us unpack it all.
Yeah, this is a big one, and it's important too. These behavioral challenges can be really tough for families to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. And this study goes deep on those problematic behaviors. We're not just talking about like the occasional, outbursts here. This is like tantrums and aggression
Mm.
and just that constant on-the-go energy. That can be so hard for parents to manage. And to really measure all of that, they use this thing called the ABC,
Hmm.
the Aberrant Behavior Checklist.
Oh yeah, the ABC. That's a really good tool. It gives a super detailed look at a child's behavior. Think of it like a questionnaire. Parents fill it out, and it really helps clinicians get a good picture of what's going on. How bad is the irritability? What about the hyperactivity? It's a good way to track that stuff.
And it looks like from the study those issues are pretty common in kids with ASD.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's right. Researchers think that a lot of children with ASD, they also end up dealing with ADHD, plus the irritability and sometimes even aggression. So it's like a double whammy for those families, which is why this kind of research is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's clear there's a need for this. But what's really cool is how they did the study. They used like the gold standard in research,
Hmm.
a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, which means the results are like way more trustworthy
Yeah.
because they're trying to get rid of bias and all that.
Exactly. Basically, they flipped a coin to figure out who got which treatment. Vitamin D, DHA-rich, omega-3, maybe both, or a placebo. And the best part, nobody knew who got what, not even the researchers, until the very end.
So it was all very hush-hush. Now, this study was done in New Zealand with kids between 2.5 and 8 years old. But one thing that really stuck out to me was
They made sure that all the kids had all their nutritional needs taken care of before the study even started.
right, that's actually a super important detail. It shows how seriously they were taking this. They wanted to make sure it was a clean slate,
Yeah.
so they took care of any deficiencies in vitamin D, iron B12, all those things. They wanted to make sure those weren't messing with the results.
Wow, talk about attention to detail. And then on top of that, they followed these kids for a whole year. A whole year, that's a long time. But it's important for a few reasons. First, it helps with things like, seasonal changes in vitamin D levels and behavior. We all know kids can be a little more all over the place, depending on the time of year. And second, the researchers said that compliance was really high, which means the kids were taking their supplements regularly. That tells us that the interventions were pretty easy to handle.
So they weren't causing any problems. Okay, so we've got the who, the where, and the how. Now for the big question. What did they find?
All right, this is where it gets interesting. Both the vitamin D and the DHA-rich omega-3 showed a pretty big reduction in irritability compared to the placebo group. And get this, vitamin D on its own. It also had a good impact on hyperactivity. Now, the group that got both supplements, they seemed to be doing well. But the number of kids in that group was smaller, so they need to do more research on that.
So those are promising signs, but are we talking about like tiny little improvements? Or did these kids actually see a real difference?
Oh, no, these were real changes. The study found that a good chunk of the kids, taking either vitamin D or omega-3, they saw at least a 25% reduction in their irritability and hyperactivity scores. So we're talking about real improvements in their daily lives, less frustration, fewer meltdowns, and their energy levels were more manageable.
That's great to hear. Now, I'm always curious about the biology side of things. Did they measure what was happening in the body? Like, were the vitamin D and omega-3 levels actually changing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And they did measure that. They looked at biomarkers to confirm that the kids were absorbing the supplements. And the results showed that they were. They were getting the doses they were supposed to.
Okay, but I have a feeling there's a twist here. There's always a twist.
You know me too well. Here's the thing. They didn't find a direct connection between those biomarker changes and the improvements in behavior. So in other words, the levels of vitamin D and omega-3 in the blood didn't directly predict how much a kid's behavior would change.
So what does that mean? Are we back to square one?
Not at all. What it really shows us is just how complex the brain is, especially when we're talking about ASD. There are so many things going on. And while vitamin D and omega-3 are clearly doing something, we're still figuring out exactly how they're working and why they're having these effects. It's good to remember, too, that every study has its limitations. This one's no different. It's not about saying the findings aren't valid, but we need to understand the context so we can really make sense of it all.
Right. So what are some things we should keep in mind about this particular study?
One thing is the sample size. It was decent, but it was still relatively small, especially when we think about how diverse ASD is. There's a whole spectrum, so it would be great to see these findings replicated with bigger groups of kids, more diverse groups too, just to make sure it applies more broadly.
And I'm guessing where the study was done matters too, since it was in New Zealand.
You got it. New Zealand's got a pretty unique climate, and their sunlight patterns are different. Now, the researchers tried to control for that by making sure all the kids had enough vitamin D at the start. But it's still something to think about. The results might not be the same for kids living in places with less sunshine.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's put this into perspective for our listeners. Say I'm a parent and my kid has ASD, and they're struggling with irritability and hyperactivity. What's the takeaway here? Should I be running out to buy vitamin D and omega-3 supplements?
I get it. You want to do something to help. But we got to remember this study. It doesn't give us a one-size-fits-all answer. Every kid is different. What works for one might not work for another. Plus, we got to think about potential interactions, with other meds or health conditions.
So the old talk to your doctor advice still holds true.
Absolutely. This study gives us some good clues, but it's super important to chat with your kid's doctor. They can help you figure out if supplements are the right choice, what the right dose would be. And they'll keep an eye out for any side effects. It's all about personalized care.
Right, personalized care. Now, this study really focused on vitamin D and omega-3 and how they affect irritability and hyperactivity. But it got me thinking about bigger picture stuff, too.
Oh, yeah, me too. It makes you wonder about what else these supplements might do.
Exactly. Like if they can help with these tough behaviors, could they be impacting other things, too? Other parts of brain function in ASD? Like what about social communication, repetitive behaviors, or even sensory sensitivities? Those core ASD symptoms.
Those are the big questions, and we don't have all the answers yet, but researchers are definitely looking into it. We know vitamin D and omega-3 are involved in all sorts of important brain stuff, like how neurotransmitters work and how the brain handles inflammation.
So there's a lot of potential there.
Tons of potential. As we learn more, we might find even more ways to help people with ASD. Maybe we can move beyond just managing symptoms and start to address some of the root causes.
Okay, so we've talked about the study's strengths and limitations, and even some of the bigger questions it raises. But now I want to shift gears a bit and focus on what this means for you, the listener.
Yeah, let's bring it home. How can people actually use this information?
Okay, so we've really gone deep on this study, vitamin D, omega-3 for kids with ASD, but now it's time to make it practical. How can you, the listener, actually use this information?
Yeah, that's what matters, right? Taking this knowledge and making it work in real life.
Exactly. Now, I bet some listeners are thinking, well, this is interesting, but my kid with ASD, they don't really have issues with irritability or hyperactivity.
Yeah.
So does this even apply to them?
That's a great question. And the answer is maybe. I mean, this study was all about those behaviors.
Right.
But the potential benefits of vitamin D and omega-3, they go way beyond that. Remember we were talking about their role in brain development, immune function, even how neurotransmitters work? All that stuff's crucial for everyone, but especially for kids with ASD.
So even if my child isn't having meltdowns all the time or bouncing off the walls, it might still be worth thinking about these supplements as part of a bigger plan for their health.
Exactly. It's about building a good foundation. And of course, we can't forget about a healthy lifestyle in general. Eating right, getting enough exercise, making sure they're sleeping well, all those things matter too.
Yeah, those are important for everyone. Whether their kid has ASD or not, it's all about creating a good environment, an environment where they can thrive.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about finding some magic cure. It's about helping your child flourish.
So where do we go from here? What's the bottom line for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is being informed and taking action. This research adds to what we already know. Vitamin D and omega-3 could be really helpful for folks with ASD. But remember, this isn't something you should just do on your own.
Right, we're not doctors or anything.
Exactly. Talk to your child's doctor. Tell them what you've learned from our deep dive here. Ask any questions you have, and work together as a team to figure out a plan that works best for your kid.
And if this has got you curious, don't stop here. There are so many resources out there. Books, websites, organizations, all dedicated to ASD. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. And keep advocating for what your child needs.
Because the more you know, the better. Especially when it comes to ASD. Knowledge really is power. It helps you navigate the tough stuff and celebrate all the wins, big and small.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Hope you found it helpful, maybe even a little inspiring.
And hey, until next time, keep diving deep and keep those requests coming. We love exploring these topics with you.
See you on the next deep dive.